Hey everybody, this is Daryl Hanks with Word of Truth Discipleship Ministries, and I have my sister Tracy on with me today, and she's just going to be giving her testimony about what the Lord has done for her through the Deliverance Ministry. So Tracy, we'll just start your story with your childhood and what it looked like growing up and your young adult years. So just take it from there.
Okay, so my parents divorced whenever I was about 8 years old. So I came from, split family or blended family because my mom did end up remarrying later on. But we moved around a lot, so I didn't get to see my dad for kind of long periods of time. We eventually moved back close, but there was periods of time where I was not able to be around him for very much, and we did a lot of moving schools. Nothing was really, it was just very unstable for a while. After we moved back closer to my dad, my mom remarried, getting into the teenage years. I was in church. We always were kind of in and out of church, like when we could, depending on where we were living or what was going on. But I would say right around senior year of high school, my mom was ill at the time, so there was a lot going on with that. She wasn't real present because she was sick, and just things were going on, in the life of a teenager. And I got out of church and got in with the wrong crowd at school, so things kind of took a turn around senior year for me, and then kind of went off onto just living my life for myself and not living my life for the Lord. And then it really was probably one bad year of just running around, because I ended up getting married at about 19, and that's whenever I kind of slowed down and got back in church at that point.
I got you. So do you, in that stretch of time there, do you feel like, you was going to church because, your mom, would take you to church? Do you feel like you gave your heart to the Lord at that point in time, or do you feel like it was just something you was doing just out of obedience?
Well, my salvation story is kind of different. Like I remember saying the sinner's prayer and giving my life to the Lord when I was around 8 years old. Mm-hmm. We were on the road, and it was just me and Mom, and she kind of walked me through that because I started asking her questions, and then she kind of told me, about the Lord and what it really meant, and so she kind of led me through that at around 8. Mm-hmm. And then I would say I did a rededication of sorts probably in my teenage years I was probably around 15, because we were in a good youth group at that time, and that was whenever things kind of had stabilized. Mom had remarried. We were, going to church regularly, and I had a good group of friends. Mm-hmm. So where everything kind of went wonky was senior year. Mom was sick, things were going on. I had issues going on. As a teenager, I think me and a boyfriend had broken up. Things just kind of started to take a turn right around senior year. Yeah. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of really just kind of turning my back on the Lord and not really knowing what to do other than to just kind of go off into a dark place.
Sure. So it's probably the story that most people have with, that their parents, bring them to church, they give their life to the Lord, and then things just start dropping off. Peer pressure, teenage years happen, and you're not worried about eternity. You're just, you kind of steer away from it, and then so when you got married, were you guys going to church? Were you out of church? Through that time frame there, what did that look like, as far as your walk with Christ and what that situation entailed?
Right. So we were actually in church at that time. So I actually started going back, and then right before I got married, my soon-to-be or husband at the time started coming with me. So we went to church for probably solid for a good 6 years, and then right around the time where we split up, the church was spotty, which that goes into another story because of my oldest having an autism diagnosis, and it was kind of hard to take him. We were able to go, but it wasn't as consistent as what we wanted because we started having issues with him, and it was getting hard to take him.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about some of the struggles and some of the things that you've been through that have led you to the point of desperation and coming back to Christ.
So I would say some of the most significant things were obviously failed relationships, and that could mean like with my dad. That was a big part, I think, because we, as I grew older, he pulled away and was more distant. Like he was there if I needed him, but he did not want to have that strong, tight-knit relationship. And so that was always a big struggle in my life, feeling just that rejection from my dad and not having the connection. Like I knew he loved me, but he did not show it, whether he didn't know how or whatnot. Sure. And so that was a big portion, I would say. Failed relationships, romantic relationships. There was a lot of just your typical not being in a relationship that I had consulted the Lord about, like, is this person right for me?
Sure.
So I had, unequally yoked situation going on at times. So there was a lot of betrayal, just a lot of back and forth that, obviously everybody contends with it at some point. Yeah. I had some abusive relationships. There was a lot of verbal abuse and different things going on at different times, and so it's my self-confidence was not in a good way, and I think over time, whenever that's a continual thing, you get to believing it, you get to agreeing with the enemy. And so I had gotten to this point to where I just did not feel like enough. I would try so hard to be as perfect as I could be, but it literally was never enough. And I struggled with that a lot. Struggled with my oldest son was diagnosed with autism whenever he was 3. And it was difficult when he was younger, but as he grew older, he was getting more and more defiant, stronger, and it was becoming very hostile, unsafe at home. And so I was a single mom raising 3 boys, and that was a big component because I felt very isolated. I was away from family. I did not have any help, and I felt that kind of pushed me to the point where I felt like the Lord had turned his back on me, because I had prayed a million prayers about my situation and nothing ever seemed to get better with it. And I just grew more and more kind of into this, just feeling abandoned, and rejected, and just not in a good place. I would say when I moved down here, I was in a better place, but I think over time, the more I started digging into all of the issues that I was having, the more I really started to dig deep and ask myself, well, why am I thinking this? Or, just not just shoving everything down and locking it away. That desperation started to grow because the symptoms I was having were getting more and more and more intense. It wasn't like I was just slapping a Band-Aid on it and going about my day, or self-medicating and pushing it down. And I was really looking at that stuff square in the face and trying to figure out how do I get rid of this? How do I get rid of this stuff?
Yeah. And so backing up a little bit, it sounds like, and I know because I'm your brother, I don't know everything, but I know, a lot of the struggles that you've been through are a lot of the struggles that I've been through as well. And so backing up a little bit, when our mother passed, how well did you deal with that? Was it something that you suppressed and put down, or do you feel like you dealt with that in a correct way?
I did not deal with it in a correct way. I don't really think any of us really knew how do you deal with grief. I think I was stuck in the like sadness stage. I stayed in that. It was kind of like a dark cloud over me for many, many years. I could just have a random thought in the middle of the day and I would just start tearing up and I would be sad. It would felt kind of like a blanket.
Mm-hmm.
If I could describe it as a physical feeling, it would be just like this heavy blanket and it would stay for several days and then it would lift later. But it was just always just this sad mourning almost. It just would not go away with her.
Yeah. So at the point, you had mentioned moving down here to Alabama. Back before that, just a little bit, as I was getting the ministry up and going and getting it started, I was talking to you and our sister Melissa. I've been talking to you both about the Deliverance ministry, what the Lord had been doing in my life. And I made a trip to Missouri, and we had been talking on the phone back and forth, and about Deliverance, about what the Lord was doing in my life. I made a trip to Missouri, and it was just to pray and try to help whoever wanted to meet. And I remember you had come to that meeting, and I think we had met like one or two times before, and nothing really happened. Nothing really moved. And when you came to that meeting there, I remember even what you said when you walked in, you're like, I am not leaving until I get some freedom. So can you remember? Can you shed a little bit of light on how you were feeling before that meeting, and maybe a little bit of what happened in that meeting there?
Yeah, I think up until that point, you're right. We did meet a couple of times and nothing really happened, I think. And so in between that and this next time in meeting, and I knew you were coming up and you were going to be leaving, I was pretty dead set on we weren't going to be leaving that room until something happened. At that point, I had hope. I feel like pretty desperate because I knew what I was struggling with and I had heard other testimonies and I knew this was possible. So I was just very hopeful and I was determined that something was going to happen that day.
Yeah. And so that day, what I remember of it was the Lord, he hit you pretty hard. He touched you pretty hard in a way that you got some freedom in that, and this is me, and this is how I look at it. This is how I guess interpret what happened in your life that day. I believe you just let some of the grief out. I don't know that you got set free from a lot of stuff, other than it was a release of a lot of that grief to the Lord, and He took a lot of the darkness and the hurt and the pain and replaced that with a joy that you had probably never felt, or had been a long time since you had felt that kind of joy. And then, just talking to you a little bit, it was, there was a couple days there, or even a couple weeks, that you were just riding around and you were on cloud nine. I mean, you were really, you were happy and laughing, and you had joy like you hadn't had in a long time. But, life got in the way, and, situations went sideways, and it was kind of you went back to where you were as far as the struggles. And so I don't want to hit a whole lot on that, but I do want, I just do want everybody to know that, I don't believe that you went through deliverance, but I do believe that there was a release there, and the Lord met you there and gave you maybe even a glimpse of what His joy and His peace and His presence looks like. Do you have anything to throw in there on that?
I definitely agree with you on the joy, because I had never felt the joy like that before. I did get rid of a lot of pain and sadness, because after that, I didn't have that heavy blanket over me about my mom. Like every once in a while, I would, get sad and be like, I miss her, but or if her birthday rolled around, but it wasn't like this constant sadness. Like, I do believe he did replace that, and took care of that hurt and that sadness in me that day. And there were some other things too that, stayed gone. It wasn't like, it was just momentarily I had it and then I didn't. It just, what happened with that was the joy and everything I had, I kind of lost, because whenever things in my personal life really just took a turn for the worst, like shortly after that, I did not know how to deal with it. And I did not feel comfortable talking to anybody else. And so I turned, like, I kind of isolated, and I shoved it all down and locked it down.
Yeah, I get that. And that seems like that is what your personality gravitates toward, not dealing with the pain.
Right.
And you're almost lying to yourself by thinking, okay, if I can push this down and not think about it, then that's how I'm dealing with it. But it's really in fact, when you push that down, it's not been dealt with, it's not been given over to the Lord, and it just kind of sits there and it slowly marinates, and it really, you get to where you are making decisions out of the pain and out of the hurt, and your daily life reflects. There'd be a lot of days you don't think about it and it doesn't come up, but when you're backed into a corner, or there's confrontation, or if there's something that triggers that, now that emotion comes right back up. So it is it's never gone, but we learn to manage it in a sense. And the thing is we don't manage it real well, but we tend to manage it. So I want to fast forward to when you moved down here to Alabama. We started meeting, and we wasn't meeting like every week. We would meet probably once every month or something like that, I would think. And you were ready to go through that deliverance process. You were ready to jump all in and go through that process. So take me back to that just a little bit, on how you were feeling, what you some of the things that you were struggling with that led you to decide to go through the deliverance process.
Right. Well, I feel like prior to moving here, I had a lot of things going on at home. I was going through a separation, or right before a separation, and so deliverance at that time wasn't really even something that I could do. Obviously, one, because I was there and you guys were down here, but leading up to it, I feel like I was in such a dark place because of the mental state I was in, because I was so clouded. I was in a mentally and verbally abusive situation. So I almost was walking in that and knowing that it wasn't right, but not really knowing how bad it was, and just treading water. So when I got out of that situation and I was in a healthy environment, I was able to see kind of exactly what was going on, and just what all I probably needed to deal with, and how far I had gotten to locking everything down and just trying to tread water, so to speak.
Yeah.
So when I got out of that environment, I started really embracing getting freedom.
Yep.
I just was locked down to the point of just not even, I was getting through each day is basically, so getting out of that fight or flight situation allowed me to really be able to focus on, hey, I don't have to live like this. I don't want to live like this.
Right.
And so that was kind of my headspace right when I moved down here, and then moving forward with doing our meetings once every couple of months. And each time we met, it seemed like, since I had so much to unpack, I kind of had homework each time. There were different things that I really had to work through, with some forgiveness, just with really digging deep with some of these old traumas and old memories that I had forgotten, that I had pushed down, that I didn't even really know they were there. It was a slow revealing process, and it was almost necessary, I feel like, because all of that could just not happen at once.
Right.
It just, when you have a lot of stuff to unpack, it just takes some time.
Yep, I agree with that. So let me ask you a question about your salvation. Now, when do you feel like you rededicated your life to the Lord, and from that point up till this point now, what did your walk with Christ look like?
Prior to coming up here or down here?
Yes. So it's basically your rededication back to the Lord.
Yeah.
And what that walk with God looked like from then up until you moved down here.
I feel like that happened it was around 2018. I was living out in Springfield, and it was just the boys and I, and going to church was spotty because my oldest was, I could not take him to church at that point, but the Lord was pushing on me and drawing on me and really working on me with forgiving my dad and making things right with him, no matter what that looked like. And there was kind of a few different things that happened in my life during that time, and I feel like that was when he had kind of started to reveal himself to me. And that was when the light bulb flipped on, and when I really felt like I dug in and was
rededicated.
Yeah, and I was not just trying to go to church just to go to church, or because I knew, it wasn't like I was on autopilot and just trying to get through my day, get through my life. Like I was starting to see a change in kind of how he was communicating with me, and then
good. So since about 2018, so that makes it 5. So that's about 7 years that you had that walk with the Lord, when you're like, hey, look, I'm going to do the best I can with this. I'm giving my heart to you the best I can, and I'm going to serve you. So along, about 7 years of going to church when you could, and reading and praying the best that you could, and doing the best that you possibly could, and that brings you to the point. That brings you to the time frame of after you moved down here and started going through Deliverance. So, and you hit on it just a second ago. As we was going through Deliverance, each session you would have homework to do, and then it might be a month, it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, and then you're like, hey, look, I'm ready to meet again. We would meet again, and there would be times where we would try to pray, nothing would move, nothing would happen, but the Lord always would tell us, this is the next thing. This is the next thing to work on. You're gonna have to forgive this person. You're gonna have to look into this scenario, this trauma. And so, like you said, it was a long drawn out. It was. I mean, we didn't meet a bunch of times, but it was over kind of an extended period of time. So that leading up to the last time that we met for Deliverance, and I'll just lead off with this just a little bit. At this point, I didn't have a clue which direction we needed to go. I didn't know. I mean, I even had some doubts about it being successful this go around, just because of, it kind of stagnated just a little bit, and you have an expectation in your mind that, this meeting is going to be the one where things break loose and you get freedom. And so I think I had gotten to the point to where, I just wasn't for sure if this one was, I didn't have high expectations of this being the meeting. But I did pray beforehand, and the Lord just kept telling me that, surrender is the word of the day, and to talk to you more about surrender. And so walk me through that, the few days leading up to that last time that we met there.
Yeah, so the Sunday before we met on a Thursday, so this was the Sunday previous. I just was having a miserable time. I was just so miserable. I felt like I just could not even think my own thoughts. Like I had so much going on in my head. And it was Sunday morning before church. I just kept feeling like I need to go in there and pray and basically give everything over to the Lord. And then I would get a thought that would be like, no, it's not genuine if you don't have enough time to dedicate towards it, because I was running late. It was just going to be a quick thing. And then I was like, no, it doesn't have to be a long, I mean, this could be 2 seconds. It doesn't matter how long I'm spending. It's what I'm doing that matters. So I went in my room and I just kneeled down in the floor and I just told the Lord if he thought he could do better, then to go ahead, because I could not take it anymore. Like not having any control over anything.
Yeah.
And trying to make heads or tails of it in my head, and just all, I had a really bad mind war going on. There was just a lot of thoughts, a lot of lying thoughts, a lot of just torment that was going on, and it was getting so loud I could not hardly get through my work day. Like I could not decipher what is my thoughts, what is not my thoughts, and even if they were mine, they weren't good. So it was like it was all bad. So I went in there and I prayed a short little prayer, went to church that morning. Pastor preached on surrender. The whole song service was about surrender, and I was about to just lose it because I'm thinking, okay, I get it, so I knew I had done the right thing, and it was from Sunday to Thursday, it couldn't get there fast enough because I literally felt every day like I was going to lose my surrender.
Yeah.
Because my thoughts were saying, you didn't really mean it.
Yeah.
You can't really surrender. You'll lose it before Thursday. And then when you get in there, you won't be able to resurrender good enough. Like it was just always just these uncontrollable things in my mind.
Yeah.
So
what you're saying is it's like these just overpowering thoughts or voices in your head trying to talk you out of even meeting on Thursday because them voices or them thoughts are telling you that your surrender wasn't genuine and this wasn't going to work. And so now you're in a warfare of, well, this, I'm hoping this is going to work. I know, because the enemy will throw little truths at us, something that's a lie mixed with a little bit of truth. And if we can buy into it, a lot of times he'll keep us from going to that prayer meeting or going to that deliverance meeting, or even he talks us into just giving up altogether. And so that's what you're saying is the spiritual warfare really intensified that in between that Sunday and the Thursday that we met.
Absolutely. But for me, what kept me on track was being so miserable.
Yeah.
Because I knew that without it, I was still in the situation that I was in.
Yeah.
So I was going to have the thoughts regardless. Even if they were a little bit less intense, I've still battled this war in my head for my whole life. So I kept pressing forward because I'm like, what's the alternative?
Sure.
Just to go back to where that things have always been.
Sure.
So yeah, it was definitely, it kicked up a notch.
Okay. So on that Thursday we met, and I remember we sat down and we were just kind of discussing and talking a little bit. And I started in on the surrender, and I could feel the tension in the room. And I mean, I know that at one point you looked at me like, what, I feel like beating your eyelids shut right here. But I mean, it was like, I prayed about this, and I felt like this is what was on my heart. And so you started in telling me about that Sunday and about, the song service and pastors preaching and what in the prayer before. Yeah. And, I just took off with it. I was like, Tracy, the Lord is pushing you to give everything over to Him. And I remember the conversation. You're like, I don't know how. I've done everything that I can think of. I've surrendered everything I can think of, and I just don't know how. And so we were almost at a stalemate there of, and I always tell everybody that's the $1 million question is how do you convince somebody to totally turn everything over to the Lord? And that's where we were at. And so we were just sitting there, and you just started talking. And so take me through that. What happened in order for you to enter into that total surrender?
So in prior prayer meetings that we had, like I don't like to cry.
Yeah.
Like it's one of the most uncomfortable things, and I avoid it like the plague. So like in our other prayer sessions, like emotion would come and I would cry. But other than the meeting we had in Missouri where I had gotten some relief from a lot of that stuff, other than that day, it never would fully release. Like it would always, I would push it back down, or it would just go away. Like I could not produce feeling where there was none. It was almost like I wouldn't allow it, or it wasn't ready to come to the surface. So I was starting to talk to you about something that I do every morning, and maybe it wouldn't have happened until now because of where the Lord has brought me. But I remember like the first morning that it happened, I woke up and I was just so happy to be where I am. I just said, thank you, Lord, for bringing me out of the pit. So after that, every morning, I thank the Lord for bringing me out of the pit. Because that is what my life was and what it felt like prior to coming here. I was in a pit that I could not get out of. And so when I was sharing that with you, I immediately got emotional and I kind of started to cry. And I was reminded prior to prayer meeting to lean into that and to not shove it down and just lean into the emotion if it came. So I leaned into it and I allowed myself to feel. I allowed myself to cry instead of pushing it down. And when I did, that was kind of in that surrender of doing that and allowing myself to feel, the Lord met me there. And it kind of triggered from there, because then I started talking about my dad, which was what really the Lord had said multiple times. He wanted the lid off of the box. He wanted the dark corners of my heart. It was like I had a tight lid on the box of my heart. So this was the lifting of the lid, was me leaning into that, allowing myself to feel. And then when I did that, I've never actually said that I needed my dad or that I miss my dad, but I started talking about it. And as that flowed, then the emotion started to flow. And then that is when the Lord started to do his work. So I would see a face of somebody who I had terrible pain with or surrounded around, and I would see the face, and then I would just let out all the pain and sadness. And that came multiple people, and it was on a cycle. And that was kind of the beginning of me opening up my heart. And really, that was my surrender. So,
and I remember, it sounds really peaceful when you're talking about it.
No.
But when you let go in that very moment, when you let go, it came out as a scream. And it was blood curling, and I thought, somebody is going to be walking by this place and think that I'm strangling you or hurting you. It was blood curling. And so I remember whenever you said that, I thank the Lord every day whenever I get up for bringing me out of the pit, and I seen the tears coming, and you said that you was told to lean into that, and as you started leaning into that, I was telling you as well, keep going with that. That's where you want to be. Keep going with that. And it was just like a switch. Whenever you made that decision of, okay, this is what I'm doing, no matter what this looks like, I am going to allow the Lord into my heart. I'm going to take the lid off of all the pain and the hurt and the grief. It was in that moment, my goodness, it was just screams of just pain, of years and years of just putting that stuff down and keeping that stuff down. And I can remember, it was a good bit of the Lord just meeting you there in that. And like you said, I believe it was, you said you were seeing faces of people. I believe that's the hurt and the trauma that you're letting go of, letting the Lord have that. And he is meeting you in that with the love and the peace that what should have been in that situation wasn't.
Right.
And so there's an exchange there, and you're giving the hurt to him, and he, in exchange for that, he's giving his love and his peace and his affirmation. Whatever it was that you needed in that situation, he was making that exchange. And so after that point in time, whenever you were done with that, I just felt the Lord leading us in that direction. I just told you, you start naming out the things that you feel like you're struggling with, what the Lord is showing you that you're struggling with. And so at that point is when you started naming the strongholds or the evil spirits that was that you had been dealing with your whole life. So and you don't have to go into a big long list of them, but do you remember just a few of them? Seemed like there was probably 8 to 10 that the Lord delivered you from. Do you remember just one or two that you're all right with sharing?
Yeah, for me, the spirit of rejection and a lying spirit and an orphan spirit, those were just a couple right off the top that were first and that were very, very intense.
Yeah.
And probably more of the deeper things that I had going on.
Yeah.
With that too, it was, with my memory anyway, came out as a scream also.
Yeah,
but it was more intense than me just kind of letting out that pain and sadness to the Lord. It was almost like it could not be released loud enough.
Yeah.
It just would not almost allow. It was so intense.
Yeah.
So that's how strong it had a hold on me. I feel like it was just.
There was some more intense than others.
Yes.
And I do think that is our personality traits as well. Those weaknesses in our lives where the enemy has a deeper hold on us. So fear was one of them that come out as well.
Mm-hmm.
And just we'll talk a little bit more at the end, but can you tell a noticeable difference between then and now as far as fear and what kind of hold it had in your life?
Absolutely. Really everything is different, but I used to always have fearful thoughts, random, weird, fearful thoughts all the time.
Yeah.
The amount of those that I get is very few, and when I get one, I do not ruminate on it.
Yeah.
I rebuke it and I go on, and I do not think about it. I'm not haunted by it. But that is probably something that one of my earliest memories is a fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would, I guess lean into it. I was a kid, so I didn't know. I was none the wiser, but I had struggled with that one from a very, very early age.
Yeah. I think that is one of them that all three of us had struggled with. Myself, you, and Melissa as well. Something that just irrational fears, and that irrational fear has got a lie tied to it of this is going to happen or that's going to happen. So then we'll make an irrational decision based on that irrational fear, and now that's a prison, or that's a bondage that the enemy can keep us in our entire life. And so it passes down to our children. I mean, in the decisions that we make in our finances, in our jobs, in our relationships, everything even in our callings and even in ministry, there are people that are so crippled by fear, they won't give their testimony, or they won't pray for a person, or they won't do this or do that. And a lot of times I believe there's going to be a spirit that is attached to that is keeping that person in bondage. So fast forwarding in just a little bit, after the deliverance, and I do want to note something that the Lord's he's been doing for the last 6 months or so with us praying for people. We've not been laying hands on people. The Lord has told us, take your hands off of them. I want to show them that this is me and I'm doing this. And so I never put my hand on your back, and I never did anything like that. And it was, there was a few times in that deliverance session where if you were stuck and the Lord gave me what the next spirit was, I would tell you, hey, try this, and you would speak to that, and immediately after that, you would go into that manifestation, you would start screaming, freedom would come after that. And so it was 90% of it was you and the Lord, and there was 10% where I was there, just if you got hung up here or there.
Right.
And so after all of that was said and done, I remember we were sitting there, and you just looked at me and you said, I want to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And I said, well, let's pray for you for that. And so tell me a little bit about your struggle with receiving the baptism of the Holy Spirit and how you felt when you would hear of your friends or somebody else that would receive that and you hadn't received that yet.
I felt like it was for everyone but me, because I had been seeking it for about 2 years, and it just would never come. It never happened. And I would watch videos that Mike Connell would have on Deliverance and on being filled with the baptism, and you and I had talked about it, and every time I would hear about somebody going through deliverance and they would receive the baptism, or just in general, just being in the environment that I'm in, it would just push me further and further into feeling rejected, like I was not good enough and it was for everyone but me. So even in this instance, whenever I said I wanted to receive it, there was a little bit of friction there, because I had always felt not good enough, and like it was just not going to happen.
Yeah.
I was half afraid to ask, but I wasn't going to not ask because I was ready.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was at.
Yeah. Well, it was an amazing moment, because you said, hey, look, will you pray for me to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit? And I said, I sure will. So prayed for you to receive that, and boom, the Lord just blessed you, and there it came. And so, I just kind of sit back and let you have your moment with the Lord, and it was amazing. And there was
joy and peace that came with that,
Yeah.
because I had felt God's joy before, but I had not felt the love.
Yeah.
And that was at the moment where I felt God's love, and that was that is what my soul needed. Like that is what I had been looking for my entire life. Never knew what it was like, and I needed that, and that is where he met me, and I was able to feel it there at that point. And I even think I was saying that during the moment, like I was acknowledging in the moment that I could feel his love.
So this has been about 2 months ago when you went through that deliverance, and this experience that we're talking about right here. It's been about 2 months ago. So just tell us a little bit of what it's like, what it's been like since then, and the difference in between then, before deliverance and after deliverance.
So before and after, that looks like being miserable, feeling a separation from me and the Lord. Even though I've given my heart to him, I still feel separated from him. Feeling like I want to press in, but I never get anywhere, and that almost like I am on the outside of where everybody else is at. Yeah. Like I'm in the kingdom, but I'm not allowed in the inner courts, I guess you could say, for lack of better words. Yeah. And then my mind was just so, it was just being hammered with so many thoughts, and I no matter how much I tried to rebuke them or not agree with them, I could not get away from them. Very, very noisy. I just struggled with so many things, and just had really just a very, very poor image of myself in so many different areas. Yeah. Just because I felt like an orphan. Yeah. I felt, I didn't mention this earlier, but around Christmas time, I started really heavily feeling like an orphan then, and I was like, where is this coming from? But that was part of me digging into that portion. But I just really just felt so isolated and just no parents, and then that separation from the Lord. And then after, my thoughts are quiet, and if I get a thought that I shouldn't, I'm easy to move on from it. And I'm very careful about what I allow myself to think about, because I do not want to agree with the enemy, and I don't want to ever go back to the place that I was in.
Yeah.
And I have noticed being able to hear from the Lord easier, because my mind is not so overcrowded with all this other stuff. So whenever I feel the Lord speak to me, I'm like, so that's what that's supposed to feel like. Because before it was like, that's that separation. I couldn't hear it because there was so much else screaming to where there was no way I could hear it.
Yeah.
And so I really feel like now I am in the place to be able to press in and to move forward, because I'm getting somewhere now.
Good.
Versus before it was like I'm never going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, was there ever any part of this that it was scary, or you thought that the enemy's got the upper hand, or there was an evil presence in the room? Did you ever have any feelings of that, or like it was, maybe I shouldn't go through with this?
You mean like while I was down here and like leading up to our last session?
More directly, in any of the sessions that we had, was there any time where you felt like, this is dark, this is ugly, I don't want to be a part of it?
Oh no.
Yeah.
I actually misunderstood what you were saying in the beginning anyway.
Yeah.
No, I never felt anything like that. For me, it was always just that thought of, it's not going to work, it's not going to work. You've done so much and you've not gotten anywhere. It was just that lying telling me that it wasn't going to work for me, but it was going to work for everyone else. That was my main struggle.
Yeah. And so would you attribute that to something putting thoughts in your head trying to keep you from the next meeting?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I feel like it was just that to give up, because you're never going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was
pretty intense.
It
probably.
was pretty intense, and with me having so much deep rooted rejection in my life, like that spoke to me loud and clear. So it was hard to shake off. But I think for me, it was just knowing so many people that had got freedom. I knew it was a lie, because I know that I'm not excluded.
Yeah.
That truth is what got me through contending with the other stuff.
Yeah. So does it feel like it has opened up the scriptures to you? Does it feel like it's opened up your prayer life, and that maybe bridge the gap there a little bit in your relationship with the Father as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just feel it feels new, because it is new.
Yeah.
If you've never had it, you don't know what to compare it to.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is all new.
Yeah. And my walk and my experience in this, I feel like this is the true freedom in Christ that the Bible talks about. This is what the early church, this is what they did. They just were under the understanding, if you were a human being, then that you could, you were subject to these things if you crossed a boundary, if you crossed a line. And so, it was just everyday stuff to them, but it really brings you back to what the early church and what Jesus did when he was walking around in his ministry. It really puts the power and the authority to the problems that we're struggling with, and it's where the true freedom, apart from salvation, it's where that true freedom lies. And that's my take on it. That's my experience with it. And so, it sounds like that's a lot of your experience with it as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I thank you very much for coming on here and giving your testimony. It is, I tell you what's amazingly similar is everybody's testimony is one of, I had these voices and I had these thoughts and I had these struggles before I went through this. And then after the Lord met me, whenever I gave all this up and whenever I renounced this stuff and whenever I took authority over these things that were plaguing my mind, that is where the true freedom comes in at. Everybody's manifestations are different. Everybody's story is different. But the one thing that always lines up is this is how I was before, and this is how I am after. And everybody says I had a block between me and the Father on being able to seek Him and press in and hear from Him. And then on the backside of the freedom, they're like, it has opened that up. Everybody's stories, and it doesn't matter if it's the people coming from this ministry that we've prayed for, or if it's a ministry across the globe. The details are a little bit different from story to story, person to person, but the outcomes are always, they always line up, and they're always the same. So I thank you for coming on here and giving your testimony. And I thank you for your obedience to the Lord. And I also thank you for your heart to, to be able to share this with people, and to be able to help people as well. So I'm proud of you, and I'm glad that you gave your testimony. It is an awesome one. And the Lord's not done yet. It's a process.
Right.
And when you go through that first round of deliverance, there's a lot of times where the mindset hasn't caught up, and you need to self-deliver, or you need to come back for another meeting, or whatever, or however. But it's the beginning of learning how to engage in that spiritual warfare, learning our authority in Christ, and knowing that the Lord just loves to meet us right there where and take care of the issue and the problem that we're facing. So
Right.
I appreciate you meeting and sharing your testimony.
Of course. Thank you.